Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the examples of your disciples that came before us, Lord, and just the same calling that you have given to each one of us, Lord. But we thank you that you are a mighty God. We thank you that you are active in each one of our lives. You're mindful of what goes on. You know everything about us, Lord. We just praise you today, Lord, that you have come to bless us, Lord. We just ask that you would open up our hearts and our minds to hear what it is that you have for us, Lord, that we would be obedient to respond, Lord. We just thank you today in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I had a couple of songs, and you know what? I'll go ahead and I'll still go with that. I changed a little bit just in the heart of Irish blessing, right? I was going to do an accent, now it left me already. So that's okay. I do know that my grandfather's name was Fitzhugh James. I'm pretty sure that was an Irish name before me. Never met him, but who knows, right? Anyway, some of the worship songs that I really love are those songs about God's love and about His power. And I think today we see an example of that today in our passage. But for example, reckless love, in the bridge it says, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. And I think of Liam Neeson, right? Right? Kicking open doors, taking names. And that's kind of the picture of God that I have. That's all powerful, right? I don't know if I'm just a man's fan or if I just love action movies. Maybe I'll just be a self-proclaimed man's fan, right? Whether it's true or not. On the other hand, there's another song, When You Walk Into the Room. I introduced that earlier, maybe about a little over a year ago. It says, when you walk into the room, everything changes. Darkness starts to tremble. At the light you bring, and when you walk into the room, every heart starts burning, and nothing matters more, right? I hope that's the picture of your God. I hope that's the picture of when He stepped into your life, everything changes, right? When Jesus, hopefully you imagine the same thing, that when Jesus walked into the room, things started changing, that your heart started burning, that all the brokenness began to bend and to heal. And we see a little bit of that picture here today when Jesus comes into the scene, right? When He wakes up, right? On the boat. And so I wanted to leave you before we continue on Psalm 23, right? An Irish blessing, something that when I think about storms in my life, this is a passage that my grandmother always reminded me of throughout my life with her. But it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in need. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And I hope today, who knows what you're going through? Maybe there's a storm. Maybe it's just a drizzle right now. But who knows what it is that goes through you. But I hope that you know this God who loves you, who's willing to break down whatever it is that's keeping you from Him. And that you would experience His love, that you would experience the burning in your heart. And so as we look at that, whether it's a Liam Neeson movie or whatever it might be, that you would experience a God who's ready to do whatever it takes for you to know Him. And when we look a little bit maybe on the opposite side, we might think of a Disney Pixar example of the boogeyman, right? This kind boogeyman that's is helpful maybe a little bit, but bear with me, I'm getting there. My wife's like, where are you going with the boogeyman? But in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, the Jews, the boogeyman was kind of a sinister figure. It was the real deal, kind of like the pirates nowadays. They're kind, they're fun, and they fly around sometimes, right? In the Disney movies. But back in the day, pirates were real, right? They were dangerous, they weren't nice. And the same thing with monsters. And so maybe a better example is in Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 12. It kind of gives some insight of these monsters that people in those times thought about, they believed was real, especially when it comes to water. And so in verse 3, it talks about 4 great beasts, each different from the other, came out of the sea. The most horrific of them came in verse 7. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and it devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Right? These are the kind of monsters that the Jews in those days thought about or understood, especially when it came to water. You're talking about Godzilla, right? You're talking about, if you've seen one of the more recent movies, Cloverfield monster, right? Ferocious, if you're into the sci-fi stuff. My wife didn't really care for that movie, but at the end of the movie, it was pretty precious. If you haven't seen it yet, they make it back to Earth, and Cloverfield monster. This is the whole movie wrapped up. You don't even get to see it, right? And then the Cloverfield monster reaches up out of the clouds and swallows the spaceship pod, say whatever you call those things, and swallows it, right? Destroys the Earth. Horrible things, right? Bill's not even going to be able to sleep tonight. Just thinking about it as he's dancing. But this long-held belief of evil monsters coming from the sea severely limited the Jews of their time. The fishermen were probably the most brave people in the world, right? In the Jewish community, thinking about what might be in the water, right? And so Jews predominantly looked to the neighbors to the north, the Phoenicians, for assistance whenever they were sailing. So for a few minutes this morning, take off your understanding of today's society and how we do things. But again, let's listen to the passage. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So to really understand this passage, maybe the fear that was going on in their minds at that time, we kind of look at a little bit of the historical context. First, we might look at the boat. In my mind, I remember as a child, I thought about this giant pirate ship. I don't know why I thought it was a pirate ship, but that's what I thought about in those days at the time. And he was sleeping below. But here we have a little bit better image of this boat that Jesus was on with his disciples. In 1986, Israel went through a time when there was a great drought, resulting in the lakes and the marshy areas drying up a great deal. And they found this boat, which they believed was to be much like the boat that the disciples would have been on at this date, giving you a little bit more of the dimensions. And the Jesus boat is what they call this. It measures 27 feet long by 7.5 feet wide, and it's only 4 feet deep. So it's not necessarily Grandpa's fishing boat necessarily, but it's not real gigantic either. So here you are, you have Jesus and his disciples, and they're out in the boat. And so you can see how that might be a little bit terrifying if a storm came upon them. It might also be helpful to understand something about the storms of the Sea of Galilee. In where they were, storms came upon them all of a sudden, without warning. If you've ever been to Colorado, you would understand these types of storms. If you're around mountain ranges, you see it, the sun's out, and it's beautiful, and you're enjoying your hike, and all of a sudden, there's lightning and hail, and all these things are pouring down on you, and you are in danger all of a sudden. If you've ever been hiking in Colorado and stayed longer than you should have been on the mountain. It's much like this in the Sea of Galilee, surrounded by very tall hills where you don't see what's coming your way. And so when you're out in a boat and you think that it's sunshine and having a good time fishing, like you've been fishing all night, I can't see that being too much fun necessarily, but all of a sudden a storm can come and hit you very quickly. A little bit more information is this Sea of Galilee was about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide. The circumference is about 33 miles all around, and the deepest part of it is about 200 feet. In our understanding, we probably wouldn't call this a sea. We know that Lake Michigan is, I don't know how many times bigger than it, much bigger than that. And so we probably, in our standards, would call it a lake. But here they are on a large lake in a somewhat small boat, and the waves are probably getting pretty big for a boat that's not very deep, holding quite a few people. And lastly, it's dark, right? I don't know about you, but I don't enjoy being on a boat when it's dark. I'm sure they had some lanterns, but I'm sure they couldn't see very far. If there is a storm, the moon's probably not shining through. And so all you see is a little bit around your boat and these waves, and they're filling up your boat a little bit, right? And they're probably thinking to themselves, Jesus, don't you care if you're going to drown? At least get a bucket, right? Bail out some of the water. Wake up. Anyone ever swim in a lake before? We have any lake swimmers, right? I don't necessarily enjoy lake water. It's kind of gross. It's kind of dirty. It's probably hindered by an experience in my youth. I have 3 older brothers. The brother just older than me, and Ellen, actually, when I was typing up my sermon, she saw this story, and she kind of giggled a little bit. And I had to tell her which uncle it was that did this, but he was out in the lake swimming, and he decided he really needed to go to the bathroom. And so, fortunately, I was not in the lake water at the time, but all these people started seeing something floating, right? And they could not get out of that water fast enough. It was almost humorous, not being them, and seeing their reaction to this. Lake water is gross. And then I also think about some of the stories of my parents, a lake that my family would frequent when we would go camping and go fishing and go swimming in. Also, was said that there were some planes had been flying over. They saw these large fish at the bottom of it, and even one of the divers that had gone down and was checking on some things in the dam was attacked by a large fish. And so in my mind, I have a hard time being in lake water sometimes. If you've been tubing, if you've been skiing and you fall off, or you have to get back on your skis, you just kind of float in that water, right? And sometimes I think about what's in this water, right? Anybody ever had that feeling before? What's in this water, right? And then you go to the ocean, it's like, whoa, what's not in this water? And so I don't know about you, but I can imagine that these fishermen had a lot of fears going on with this storm, being in the dark, not knowing what's going on, water filling up in the boat. And here Jesus is, he's sleeping. on a cushion. You would think that the water would open him up anyway, but I don't know. Maybe it would be a little more helpful if we think about people that never really understood. When I was in East St. Louis, I had some teens, and they had never been outside of East St. Louis, let alone to lake water swimming. None of them knew how to swim. And we went to the Mississippi River. It was 4th of July weekend at the Arch. And of course, you have to take your shoes off and walk at least right there on the edge of the Mississippi River, right? Anybody ever been there before, done that? You had to take your shoes off and do that. So these teenagers are just tromping through the water, having the greatest time kicking it, splashing each other, and somebody said something about fish making the river, right? Which in our minds, fish are in the river, right? It's not a question. And they were terrified. They said, "Captain, there's fish in this water?" And I said, yeah, there's fish in this water. And they couldn't get out fast enough. And so there's a lot of unknowns at times in our life. Because Jesus wanted to cross to the other side, the disciples were obedient in taking it there. But Jesus' words spoken to the purest storm have always held a fascination for me. I hope that you can see Jesus is speaking out of the belief of this culture that there's monsters, that all these different things that going on are out of their control. And here we see Jesus speaking to the storm, speaking to the winds, to be still, to be quiet, right? As we look back last week in him speaking to the demon to shut up, right? And that same understanding that we get in this passage, we see the disciples witnessing their teacher, right? Here he's sleeping, clueless of what's going on in their minds, and they wake him up, and he says, "Be still, be quiet," and everything calms down. And this threat that was harming their understanding of what life was and what the world am I doing on this lake at night, and there's a storm. Is this really what I want to be doing? And then this person that they began to know and understand as their teacher comes up with authority. Not just fights demons, not just heals people, but has command over even the weapons and their surroundings. When we see Jesus rebuke the storm, it changes things, right? And I don't know about your life, if you've had those storms in your life and Jesus has quieted those storms in your life, or maybe gave you peace in your life during those storms. But we see a reaction of the disciples marked by two strong words. First, as a reaction to the violence of the storm and the boat filling up the water, we see that there was fear. Rightfully so, right? When you're in danger, there's a thing as healthy fear, right? You might be out in the woods and there's a bear off in the distance and you get into the car, right? Where it's safe. And then there's the unhealthy fear, right? Where you're out in the woods and you see a bear and you just kind of go, and you cry and you fall on the ground and the bear comes and eats you. That's an unhealthy fear, right? That incapacitates you. Second, when the storm obeys Jesus' command and the wind immediately stops blowing and the water returns to just calmness, we see a second reaction. It says that terror came upon them because they witnessed what Jesus was able to do. That this wasn't just Jesus having enough faith or believing that if he prayed to God that this was going to happen, but this was a man who was fully man, but a man who was completely God as well, that had authority over the things of this world, that could quiet the storms, that could bring healing, that could shut up a demon, that could make the wind stop. They witnessed the power and the authority that their teacher had, that wasn't any ordinary man. So can you imagine what the reactions were when they reached dry land? They most definitely were dancing, Bill. I would have been dancing. Probably not very good. I might have been kissing some ground too. But I think we have to kind of go beyond maybe the historical context of what was going on. But the question is, what does this mean for us? We can sometimes read scripture and we take it as a story or we take it as history. But what does it mean to us? In bridging God's word to our lives, David Garland suggests the use of 3 questions. The first one was, what does the story reveal about a human predicament? You don't have to be very old to know that life can be unpredictable. Very early in life, we see that things happen to us. That's out of our control. We live in a fallen world. Sometimes it's bullying, sometimes it's hunger, sometimes it's serious illness or family conflict. Many of us have suffered through that. Even at an early age, we've seen that life isn't fair. Maybe you're in the same boat as the disciples. Your faith is weak and you don't know who to trust in. But what does this story reveal about Jesus? What does this story reveal about the one that you call Christ, the one that you call Savior, the one that you call Master and Lord of your life? Do you see him as the one that has authority over all these things? Even in the situations in your own life, does he have authority over those things? And you have that understanding and that faith that he can do the impossible. He's powerful because he is God. And that's the reason Jesus could speak directly to the storm and it had to obey him. That's the reason demons had to obediently surrender to his command. That's why Jesus could touch the blind eyes and sight was immediately restored. Is he that Jesus to you? Ken Brower's caution is appropriate in our consideration of the faith, of our faith in the midst of our storms. He writes, "This story should not be used in a facile fashion that minimizes the very real storms of life that can bring fear to individuals as if sufficient faith calms every storm. The great distress the disciples experience at the prospect of drownings is the kind Jesus faces in Gethsemane, when the cost of obedience will be the will of God threatens imminent death on a Roman cross. God's people are not immune to fears that threaten to overwhelm them. But in the face of catastrophe, this story reminds us that the good purposes of God's will ultimately triumph. Sometimes it is through the immediate calming of the storm, as it happens here. At other times, God gives the courage and hope to face the storm, as with Jesus in Gethsemane. Sometimes Jesus doesn't calm the storm, but he gives us the strength. He gives us the peace when we go through the storm. And I don't know which of that you're going through, but it takes exercising our spiritual muscles. Just like exercising, you're not all of a sudden able to lift a great deal of weight. You're not all of a sudden this mighty person because you thought, I'm a weightlifter now, and all of a sudden I'm this person. But it takes time, and it takes situations that we have gone through. It begins to strengthen our spiritual muscles. We don't become this iron-fisted faith or receive this iron-fisted faith by just believing in it, but it takes us believing in him through even the smallest of opportunities to trust in him. Are you trusting him? Do you believe in his power and his authority in your life? Not just in the big situations, but even in the small situations. I'm going to ask EJ to come up and play our prayer for us, but I just wanted to quote the song that we'll sing as well. It says, all who sail, we're going to listen to it, which I was going to have to do anyway. But all who sail the sea of faith find out before too long how quickly blue skies can grow dark and gentle winds grow strong. Suddenly fear is like white water pounding on the soul. Still, we sail unknowing that our Lord is in control. Sometimes he calms the storm with a whispered peace, be still. He can settle any sea, but it doesn't mean he will. Sometimes he holds us close and lets the wind and waves go wild. Sometimes he calms the storm, and other times he calms his child. He has a reason for each trial that we pass through in life. And though we're shaken, we cannot be pulled apart from Christ, no matter how the dragon rain beats down on those who hold to faith. A heart of trust will always be a quiet, peaceful place. As we listen to this song, I just want to ask that you would gather in groups of 2 or 3, and that you would just pray for each other. Maybe there's a storm that's going on in your life. Maybe there's a situation that's happening in your life, and maybe you have peace already in your life. Maybe you have strength already in your life. But what is that storm that's going on in your life? That you would pray and lift up each other as the music plays. I would ask that you would do. And then I'll close in prayer.
Long sail the sea of fate, find out before quickly the blue skies can roll dark, gentle winds roast the suddenly feels like a white one pounding on the soul. Still be still, knowing how long does it come for? Sometimes he comes the storm with a whistle, peace be still. He can settle the sea, but it doesn't mean he will. Sometimes he holds us close as the wind and waves go wild. Sometimes he calms the storm, other times he calms the child. He has a reason for his strong though we're shaking, we cannot be pulled apart from Christ. No matter how the dry rain beats down on those who hold faith, heart of trust belong with Christ. He's a place. Sometimes he calms the storm. Peace be still. He can settle in the sea, but it doesn't mean he will. Sometimes he holds us close. It's the wind and waves go wild. Sometimes he calms the storm. Other times he calms his child. Sometimes he calms the storm. The whistle, peace be still. He can settle any sea, but it doesn't mean he will. Sometimes he holds close. That's the wind and waves go wild. Sometimes he calms the storm. Sometimes he calms the storm. Sometimes he calms the storm. Other times he calms the child.
Father God, we pray for that calm and that peace in our lives, Lord. So often we want you to stop the storm right now. God, I pray for anyone in this room right now, Lord, that's in the middle of a storm that won't seem to stop. I pray that your peace would reign in their hearts and in their minds, in their families, through every second of the situation they find themselves in. God, I pray that you would remind them of your love and your presence and your power in their lives. We thank you, Lord, for the victories you brought us through, for the storms that you helped us to get through, for the storms that you have calmed, that you have stopped. And God, we pray for the strength and the faith to continue to trust you each day, despite the circumstances, God, despite what the future may look like, despite what today might hold. We trust in you. We know that you are good, and we praise you. Amen. If you'll stand, I have a final blessing for you today from the book of Numbers. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. Hi.